A crisp autumn morning swept through Portland, Maine, carrying the unmistakable scent of dried leaves scattered across the cobblestone streets. With over 15 years of experience uncovering hidden treasures, Sarah Mitchell, a seasoned antique appraiser, stepped through the doorway of a magnificent Victorian mansion on the historic Elm Street. From every corner of New England, collectors had been drawn to the Whitmore estate sale, each one hoping to discover something remarkable among the family's century-old possessions. Immediately drawn to a small collection of photographs arranged on an ornate mahogany table with intricate hand-carved details, was Sarah's trained eye, sharpened by countless hours examining artifacts from bygone eras. One particular photograph among the sepia-toned portraits and faded images of family gatherings seemed to call out to her, almost demanding her attention. Dated 1914, what she found was a formal studio portrait depicting an elegant black family of four, wearing an impeccably tailored dark suit that spoke of considerable wealth and social standing. The father stood tall and dignified, a remarkable achievement for an African-American family during the Jim Crow era. Dressed in a stunning white blouse with her hair styled in the fashionable Gibson girl manner of that period, his wife sat gracefully before him, both dressed in their finest attire. Two children completed the portrait, a young boy, who appeared to be around 8 years old, and a little girl no older than 5. The photograph bore the embossed seal of Hartwell Studios in Boston, one of the city's most prestigious and exclusive photography establishments. What made this even more remarkable was that Hartwell Studios was known to serve primarily wealthy white clientele, suggesting this black family had achieved an extraordinary level of prominence and respect in early 20th century Boston society. If you're fascinated by hidden historical mysteries and discoveries that completely change what we thought we knew about the past, smash that like button right now and subscribe to this channel. Hit the notification bell, too, because what you're about to learn in the next few minutes will absolutely blow your mind. Bringing the image closer to examine every detail with meticulous care, Sarah lifted the silver frame from the table. The standard conventions of portrait photography from that era were followed in the composition. Behind his seated wife stood the patriarch positioned, with the children arranged formally beside their parents. Precisely calculated appeared every element, exactly as was customary for photographic records of that time period. Yet something about the mother's posture struck Sarah as deeply unusual, almost unsettling, in a way she couldn't immediately explain. Maintaining the reserved and solemn expressions expected during formal sittings of that period, the rest of the family directed their gazes straight into the camera lens, while the woman's left hand displayed a peculiar positioning. In an unnatural way curved her fingers inward, as though deliberately concealing something from view. "Quite a fascinating piece you found there, wouldn't you say?" came an elderly voice from behind. Introducing herself as Margaret Whitmore, the great-granddaughter of the mansion's original owners, an older woman approached. For generations her family had maintained the property, accumulating various items and heirlooms along the way. "Do you happen to know anything about the people in this photograph?" Sarah inquired, her professional curiosity now fully awakened. Slowly Margaret shook her head. That this particular photograph had arrived along with several other inherited items over the decades was explained by her, according to what little family knowledge existed. One of the few prosperous black families in Boston during that period, named Patterson, had owned the portrait. Beyond that single piece of information, nothing else about their story had survived the passage of time. Once more Sarah returned her attention to the image. Continuing to nag at her instincts, was that unusual positioning of the mother's hand, creating an almost magnetic pull that she simply couldn't ignore. That there was far more to this photograph than met the eye was what something told her. Carefully positioning the antique photograph beneath her professional magnification equipment was done by Sarah back at her downtown Portland office. An invaluable lesson had been taught to her by decades spent appraising historical items. Often hide within the smallest details, the most extraordinary discoveries. Those minute elements that most people simply overlook or fail to recognize as significant. As she methodically adjusted the focus and lighting on her specialized equipment, with startling clarity the image began revealing its secrets. Following the masculine fashion standards of that era was the father's mustache, perfectly waxed and groomed. Appearing pristine, pressed and spotless, without a single wrinkle or stain visible, was the children's clothing. The meticulous care and attention to detail that characterized formal portrait sessions of the early 20th century was demonstrated by every aspect of the photograph. What struck Sarah most profoundly, however, was what this image represented historically. Sitting for an expensive portrait at one of Boston's most exclusive studios was a black family in 1914, a time when African Americans faced tremendous obstacles and systemic oppression throughout the United States. Barriers that seemed insurmountable for most people of color during that period had clearly been broken through by the Pattersons. But it was the mother's hand that captured Sarah's complete and undivided attention. Appearing between the woman's elegantly curved fingers, barely visible in the original unenhanced viewing, was the edge of something white. Paper. The object seemed to be a small folded piece, carefully concealed, yet not entirely hidden from the camera's lens. That she was holding it intentionally was suggested by the deliberate way her fingers curved, perhaps hoping it would go unnoticed in the formal portrait, while still preserving whatever it represented. As the implications began forming in her mind, Sarah felt her pulse quicken. That people often concealed significant things in plain sight was a lesson she had learned throughout her 15-year career praising historical artifacts, particularly during times of social upheaval, personal crisis, or when facing circumstances beyond their control. Particular significance in American and world history was held by the year 1914. When families across America confronted tremendous uncertainty and faced difficult decisions about their futures, it marked the beginning of the Great War in Europe, a period would have been multiplied exponentially for a black family with obvious wealth and status. The pressures and dangers of that era, often viewing their success with suspicion or outright hostility, was a society they lived in. Enormous importance must have been carried by whatever Eleanor Patterson had hidden in her hand that day. Using her high-resolution camera, Sarah photographed the detail and transferred the image to her computer for digital enhancement. Slightly more distinct became the white object on her monitor, appearing to be folded paper of some kind, though its actual contents remained tantalizingly mysterious. Reaching for her phone, the number of her longtime colleague, Dr. James Reed, was dialed by Sarah, a historian who specialized in early 20th century African-American social history at the University of Southern Maine. The perfect person to consult was made him by his expertise in documenting the lives and struggles of black families during this period. Unable to contain the excitement building in her voice, she said, "James, I've come across something that I think will genuinely interest you. From 1914, featuring a prosperous black family in Boston, it's a family portrait. Hiding in her hand is something the mother. Something she clearly didn't want others to see, yet something she couldn't bear to let go of completely. What black families faced during that period, given the historical context, this could be truly significant. Without hesitation, James replied, "Send me those images immediately." Clearly piqued was his own curiosity. An absolutely pivotal year was 1914, especially for African American communities. From economic uncertainty to the threat of racial violence to the looming war overseas, black families were dealing with everything. Might tell us a remarkable story about survival and resistance during one of America's most challenging eras, whatever this woman was concealing. With the careful eye of someone who had dedicated his entire career to uncovering hidden black history, Dr. James Reed examined the high-resolution images Sarah had transmitted to him. The potential significance of the concealed object was immediately recognized by his historian's mind. Meticulously choreographed affairs where every single element was carefully controlled and positioned were formal studio portraits in 1914. Absolutely nothing appeared by accident or coincidence. During their meeting at the university's African American Studies Department, James explained to Sarah, "The Hartwell Studios marking gives us our first genuine clue. One of Boston's most exclusive photography establishments from 1895 until 1925 was operated by Theodore Hartwell. That Hartwell was known to be one of the few high-end photographers who would accept black clients. For an additional premium, of course, is what makes this particularly interesting. Might help us identify this family and understand their place in Boston's black elite, his client records, assuming they still exist somewhere." The entire morning making calls to various historical societies and archives throughout the Boston area had been spent by James. Back in 1967, they had acquired Hartwell's complete business records, was confirmed by his contacts at the Massachusetts Historical Society, including detailed appointment books, financial ledgers, and client correspondence files. With determination, Sarah announced, "I'm driving to Boston first thing tomorrow morning. This mystery isn't going to solve itself, and I have a feeling we're on the verge of uncovering something important." Seated in the climate-controlled archives of the Massachusetts Historical Society was found Sarah the following morning, containing appointment ledgers, client correspondence, and even some original photographic glass plates carefully preserved over the decades were 3 substantial archival boxes occupied by the Hartwell Studios collection. With the 1914 appointment book, she began her search, methodically scanning through months of handwritten entries. Precise and detailed was the notation system Hartwell used, recording not only appointments, but also payment amounts and special notes about each session. Exactly what she had been searching for was discovered by Sarah under the date March 15, 1914. Patterson family portrait 2 p.m. Payment received 18.75 premium, sitting special accommodation. A residential address was included in the entry 145 Beacon Street, Boston. When she read that address, Sarah's breath caught in her throat. One of the most prestigious addresses in all of Boston was Beacon Street, home to wealthy industrialists, prominent merchants, and old money families. To an almost unimaginable level of success and social standing spoke to a black family residing there in 1914. That the Pattersons could afford Hartwell's most expensive services was suggested by the premium sitting notation, while the additional arrangements made for photographing black clients at an establishment that primarily served white patrons was what special accommodation likely referred to. As she photographed the entry with her phone, Sarah's hands trembled slightly. At that remarkable address would involve researching the Patterson family's history in the next step of her investigation. On the verge of uncovering something truly extraordinary, she already sensed she was a story of black achievement, hidden secrets, and perhaps tragedy that had remained buried for over a century. With a curious expression, a librarian approached her research table. "Finding what you're searching for?" Her voice barely above a whisper, Sarah replied, "I believe so. Now I need to discover who the Pattersons truly were. How a black family achieved such prominence during such a difficult era, and what a mother felt compelled to hide in her hand during what should have been a joyful celebration of their family's success." Upon her show the mystery as she prepared to the mystery deeper into the Patterson family history. Both triumph and tragedy from one of America's most turbulent periods, a story that promised to reveal. Sarah's next destination in her quest for answers became the Boston Public Library's genealogy department. Armed with the address from Hartwell's appointment records, through city directories, census records, newspaper archives, and other historical documents that had survived the passage of more than a century, she began the painstaking process of piecing together the Patterson family story. In remarkable detail, the 1910 federal census revealed the family's composition. Listed as a textile merchant was Thomas Patterson, age 42, an impressive occupation for any man during that era, but especially significant for an African American. Recorded as keeping the household was his wife Eleanor, aged 36. At the time of that census, their son William had just turned 4 years old, while only 1 year old was listed as their daughter Catherine. That the family employed 2 domestic servants was also documented by the census, a clear indication of substantial wealth during Boston's booming textile industry period. That Thomas Patterson owned and operated Patterson and Associates was revealed by further research, a remarkably successful textile importing business with connections to mills and manufacturers throughout New England and beyond. Fine fabrics sourced from European manufacturers was what the company specialized in, a trade that required extensive international contacts, sophisticated business acumen, and the ability to navigate complex import regulations. Even more extraordinary was what made Thomas Patterson's achievement the historical context. Under brutal Jim Crow segregation in the South lived the vast majority of Black Americans in 1914, working as sharecroppers or in other low-wage occupations. In housing, employment, and nearly every aspect of daily life faced discrimination those who had migrated north. A triumph against almost impossible odds represented for Thomas Patterson to have built a successful international trading business and established his family on prestigious Beacon Street. Part of Boston's small but influential black elite were the Pattersons, Sarah discovered, a community of educated, wealthy African Americans who had managed to carve out spaces of success despite the pervasive racism of their time. These families often knew each other, intermarried, and worked together to support their community while navigating the dangerous waters of early 20th century American society. But as Sarah delved deeper into the newspaper archives from 1914, casting a shadow over the Patterson family's remarkable success story, she began uncovering troubling information. A small notice buried in the business section was contained in the Boston Globe from February 1914. Patterson and Associates faces difficulties amid changing European trade conditions. Mentioned in the article were concerns about the company's import documentation and questions being asked by federal authorities was suggested. Far more alarming was an item Sarah discovered in the Boston Herald dated March 10, 1914, precisely 5 days before the family sat for their portrait at Hartwell Studios. Local textile merchant Thomas Patterson questioned by federal investigators regarding suspected irregularities in import documentation. Read the headline. As the pieces began falling into place, Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. While Thomas was under active federal investigation, the Patterson family had commissioned their expensive portrait at Boston's most exclusive studio. Sarah understood immediately how precarious their situation must have been given the racial dynamics of that era. Not only legal jeopardy, but potentially his very life faced a black man accused of federal crimes in 1914, entirely new meaning to whatever Eleanor Patterson had concealed in her hand. That March afternoon was given by this context. As a prosperous Boston family, during what might have been their final family portrait, what had she hidden? And in such an unusual way, why had she felt compelled to preserve it? Noticing Sarah's intense focus on the documents spread before her, the reference librarian approached the table. In a quiet voice she asked, "Are you researching the Patterson textile case?" Genuinely surprised, Sarah looked up. "You're familiar with it. Quite a fascinating case study, actually. During that period involving a prominent black businessman, one of the few, of customs fraud in 1915, Thomas Patterson was convicted. Absolutely everything was lost by the family. Their beautiful home, the business Thomas had built over decades, their hard-won social standing in Boston society." Before continuing, the librarian paused dramatically. Eleanor Patterson. She disappeared shortly after the trial concluded, to Canada with her children, to escape the scandal and protect them from the aftermath, is what some historical accounts suggest. She fled. That something far more tragic occurred, believe others. No one really knows what happened to her, the truth. An almost electric sensation, coursing through her body, Sarah felt, suddenly seemed far more significant than a simple family keepsake, whatever Eleanor Patterson had concealed in her hand during that March 1914 portrait. To understanding what truly happened to this remarkable family, it might hold the key and perhaps even reveal a hidden truth that had remained buried for more than a century.